Deep in the vaults of military bases, where the light of day never reaches, and in secret laboratories hidden from prying eyes, there are secrets that could change the nature of war, of humanity. In 2025, the world witnessed a fateful event. An order was issued from the highest corridors of power in Washington, D.C. Attack Iran's nuclear facilities. The decision was made, the missiles flew, the bunkers were destroyed. But what was really awakened beneath the rocks, amid the ruins of a high-tech war? Not radiation, not atomic bombs, but something more primal, more terrifying, a buried secret now rising from the depths of the earth. Initial intelligence reports spoke of only physical damage, but soon strange signals began to emerge. Inexplicable illnesses, terrifying physiological changes, unusual behavior were reported from the epicenter of the blast. We dive into the ultimate fear of an invisible threat. Follow Agent Alex Vance, a sharp intelligence analyst forced to confront the irrational, and Dr. Lena Petrova, a brilliant biochemist racing against time to decode a disease no textbook has ever seen. Will a military strike, meant to stop a threat, accidentally trigger a biological nightmare? Are humans themselves becoming weapons, hosts of destruction that no army can stand against? Unravel the secrets behind the Iranian explosion, explore chilling theories, and confront the haunting truth. When humans change, the nature of terror changes forever.
Deep. Part 1. The Doom of Terror. The Attack and the Call from the Unnamed Deep. The year 2025, a year marked by unprecedented geopolitical tensions, saw the President of the United States order an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. The decision, made after months of diplomatic confrontation and constant intelligence reports about the progress of uranium enrichment, turned a potential conflict into direct military action. The roar of fighter jets tore through the Middle Eastern night sky, precision-guided missiles plowing into fortified underground bunkers believed to house top-secret nuclear materials and technology. The world held its breath, waiting for a response. Initially, damage reports focused on destroyed structures, disabled air defenses, and plumes of smoke rising from the desert. A sense of relief spread across Western power centers. The nuclear threat seemed to be contained. That hope was short-lived, however. Not long after the initial attacks, strange, unofficial reports began to filter into intelligence channels. The initial news was little more than whispers. Unusual casualties, abnormal biological reactions in the epicenter, civilians affected in inexplicable ways. Field hospitals near the target area began receiving patients with previously unseen symptoms, high fevers of unknown origin, strange skin rashes, and sudden changes in behavior, from apathy to uncontrollable aggression. At the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, Senior Special Agent Alex Vance was watching the reports with growing skepticism. Vance, a veteran of cyber warfare and counterintelligence, had always relied on hard data and logic, but the information coming from Iran did not fit any scenario he had ever seen. "This isn't radiation. This isn't a conventional chemical weapon," Vance muttered to his colleagues, his eyes glued to a monitor displaying unusual biometric data from the victims. "There's something else going on." He began an internal investigation, a hunt for the truth amid the code and censored intelligence reports. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, at a Centers for Disease Control and Prevention (CDC) BSL-4 biosafety laboratory in Atlanta, Georgia, Dr. Lena Petrova received a batch of biological samples from patients in Iran. Petrova was a cold, brilliant biochemist with a knack for deciphering the most complex biological threats. At first, she thought it was a new virus, perhaps released by the attack, but upon closer analysis, the results were shocking. The samples showed not only an unknown pathogen, but also signs of genetic mutation, a fundamental change in the host's biological makeup. "This is not a disease. This is a mutation," Petrova whispered, her eyes fixed on the microscopic images of the cells changing shape. Vance and Petrova, initially working independently on separate pieces of the same puzzle, gradually begin to realize a horrifying connection. The strange deaths in Iran, the rumors of lunatics in the countryside, and the inexplicable biological data all point to a single point. The military strike on Iran's nuclear facilities had accidentally unleashed something more terrible than an atomic bomb. Had Iran been hiding a secret biological weapons program under nuclear cover? Or had the attack accidentally awakened an ancient pathogen, locked deep underground, now unleashed? The chilling truth is beginning to emerge. Iran may be doing more than just nuclear research. Underground, they may be developing or storing a biological weapon beyond imagination, one that could transform humans into uncontrollable instruments of destruction. The first reports of mysterious events from remote areas of Iran were not reported by the mainstream media, buried under the flood of war and political news. This created a simmering anger among those who were closely following it. How could such a terrifying threat have been ignored, hidden by political priorities and a lack of transparency? A sense of helplessness and horror spread through the intelligence community as they realized the true scale of the threat. This was no conventional war. This was a mutated threat, a new kind of weapon that was taking root in humanity itself. The ultimate injustice was that the very decision to protect the world from a nuclear threat had inadvertently unleashed an even worse biological nightmare, bringing humanity into a confrontation with its own biological nature.
Part 2. Whispers in the Wire, the mystery of the unknown region and the potential threat. As the echoes of the attack on Iran's nuclear facilities faded, a new chaos began to bubble up in the global intelligence networks. Not reports of radiation or infrastructure damage, but chaotic signals from the epicenter, whispers in the wires of something beyond comprehension. Agent Alex Vance, with the keen eye of a veteran counterintelligence analyst, began to notice the intercepted, encrypted data, fragments pointing to a mysterious Area X, or Project Chimera, hidden deep inside the bombed sites. These reports, filtered through layers of military and intelligence censorship, still contained alarming terminology, unidentified cellular mutations, abnormal biological reactions, and exponential infection rates in local populations with no known connection to the military facilities. While Vance was trying to piece together this intelligence, at the BSL-4 lab in Atlanta, Dr. Lena Petrova was facing an unprecedented biological threat. The biological samples from the Iranian patients were initially considered to be signs of a new virus, possibly released by the attack. But when further analysis was performed, the results were chilling to Petrova and her team. The samples not only showed a completely unknown pathogen, but also signs of cellular mutation at the genetic level, a fundamental change in the biological makeup of the host. Human cells were undergoing an unusual restructuring, unlike any disease or biological agent ever documented. This is not a disease. This is a transformation, Petrova whispered to herself, her eyes fixed on the microscopic images of the cells twisting and warping under the microscope. Vance and Petrova, working independently at first, gradually realize that they are pursuing two sides of the same terrifying coin. Mysterious deaths in Iran, rumors of lunatics in the countryside, and inexplicable biological data all point to one thing. The military strike on Iran's nuclear facilities has accidentally unleashed something far more terrible than an atomic bomb. They begin to suspect that the nuclear facilities are a cover for another darker agenda. Perhaps it is a secret Iranian biolab where they are developing a bioweapon beyond imagination. Or worse, the attack has accidentally awakened an ancient pathogen locked deep underground from millennia, now unleashed, like a curse broken. The horror lay not only in the nature of the threat, but also in its cover-up. The first reports of mysterious events from remote areas of Iran were not reported by the mainstream media, buried under the flood of war and political news. Senior officials seemed to be trying to control the narrative, perhaps to avoid panic or to cover up a terrible mistake. Vance began to notice anomalies in internal CIA and Pentagon communications, dropped calls, retracted reports, ignored warnings. Some deep state was trying to control the narrative to prevent the truth from coming out. In Petrova's lab, tests showed that the pathogen could not only be spread through direct contact, but also linger in the air as tiny droplets, causing a silent and widespread infection. What's more, those infected did not die immediately. Instead, they underwent a slow transformation, starting with psychological changes, amnesia, aggression, erratic behavior, then physical changes that gradually deformed their bodies. These were not mindless zombies. They were people losing their essence, turning into disease vectors or even uncontrollable living weapons. Vance and Petrova realized that they are racing not just against a pathogen, but against time. Every hour that passes, thousands of people could be infected. Thousands of new weapons could be created. The ultimate injustice is that the very decision to protect the world from a nuclear threat has inadvertently unleashed an even worse biological nightmare, bringing humanity into a confrontation with its own biological nature. Can they unlock the secret and stop the mutation before it consumes the entire world?
Part 3. The embroidery of horror, the new shape of war, and animal instincts. As pieces of raw data and biological samples continue to pour in from the war zone of Iran, Dr. Lena Petrova and Special Agent Alex Vance begin to confront a terrifying truth. The threat they are investigating is more than a pathogen. It is a mutation agent, a primitive but terrifying biotechnology that can alter human nature at the genetic level. What they are witnessing is not ordinary death, but a terrifying recreation of life. In her sealed laboratory, Dr. Petrova studied the deformed tissue samples. Under an electron microscope, she saw cells that had undergone a previously unknown mutation. DNA strands twisted in an unusual way, creating new proteins that had never been seen in human biology. This led to structural changes in bones, muscles, and especially the nervous system. Initially, symptoms included fever and disorientation, but quickly escalated into violent seizures, a collapse of higher cognitive functions, and the emergence of primitive, aggressive instincts. The victims were literally no longer human. They became bloodthirsty entities, incapable of attacking, unable to feel pain, and most terrifying of all, capable of spreading the mutation through bodily fluids. Agent Vance, meanwhile, grapples with increasingly conflicting and disturbing intelligence reports. The information channels from the Middle East become chaotic. Initially, the U.S. military and its allies report unusual suicide attacks by local militants who seem to have lost their fear of death and fight with irrational ferocity. But Vance, based on Petrova's preliminary analysis, begins to suspect that these are no ordinary extremists. These are modified individuals, living biological weapons that have been activated by something in the attack. One of Petrova's most chilling discoveries was the connection between this mutagen and materials found at the nuclear sites that were attacked. Debris from the underground bunkers, initially thought to contain only radioactive isotopes, bore traces of an unknown form of organic matter, a biological sludge that releases microscopic particles when subjected to a strong physical shock, like a bomb blast. Terrifying theories began to form. Iran's nuclear facilities might be a cover for a more secret project, a biochemical program that even Iran did not fully control.
Or worse, the U.S. attack had accidentally broken an ancient seal, releasing a mutant pathogen that had lain dormant for millennia, waiting to be awakened. The horror was not limited to the battlefield. Leaked reports suggested that American soldiers and civilian contractors involved in post-attack cleanup operations were also showing symptoms. The contagion was no longer confined to Iran. It had crossed the border, threatening American military bases in the region and potentially the United States itself. This caused a wave of panic in military and intelligence circles. Top-secret orders were issued for quarantines and extensive medical testing, but the lack of transparency created fertile ground for fear and conspiracy theories. Vance realized he was dealing with an intelligent threat. It did not kill its hosts outright, but transformed them, using them as a vehicle and a weapon. This broke all known rules of warfare. The enemy no longer wore uniforms. They could be anyone, at any time, even those you trusted most. The psychological fear of losing one's humanity, of becoming something hideous, began to haunt investigators and high-ranking officials. The greatest injustice is revealed. A nation's decision to stop one threat, nuclear, inadvertently unleashes another, far worse threat that no one can control. The war is no longer about winning on the battlefield, but about reclaiming humanity's very essence. Information about this transformation remains top secret, creating a thick veil of cover-up, leaving the public completely unaware of the impending danger. Will they be able to decipher the secrets of this chimera project and stop the transformation before it consumes the entire world?
Part 4. The Betrayal of Knowledge, when the truth is buried and the enemy is within us. As evidence of biological change becomes increasingly clear and terrifying, Agent Vance and Dr. Petrova's investigation begins to hit unexpected walls, resistance and cover-ups from their own superiors. The horror comes not only from the pathogen that is transforming people, but also from manipulation and betrayal from within the government. Vance began to find his reports delayed or falsified. Requests for additional resources, for lockdowns of affected areas, were inexplicably denied. Emergency meetings he called were canceled or turned into generalities that did not address the core of the biological threat. Worse still, Dr. Petrova's detailed reports on the nature of the mutation agent, the unusual proteins and the DNA reorganization seemed to be missing from the classified system. Some invisible hand was trying to stifle the truth. Vance's suspicions gradually focus on a small group of senior government and military officials with access to the most sensitive intelligence reports. Perhaps some kind of deep state group whose power and influence far exceed the control of the regular branches of government. What are they trying to do? Cover up a terrible mistake in the attack on Iran? Or worse, exploit the threat itself for their own ends? The horror is no longer about transformed flesh, but about the perversion of power, about monsters hiding in elegant suits. Petrova felt the pressure too. Her samples began to be copied and taken away by teams of unknown origin. Her computers were constantly being searched, and trusted colleagues were gradually being reassigned to other projects. She realized that her work was being closely monitored, and that she and Vance were being targeted. "They don't want the truth to come out, Alex," Petrova whispered over the secure line. "They don't care what it's doing to people. They care about controlling the narrative." The most terrifying hypothesis began to form in Vance's mind. Was the nuclear facility attacked in Iran a secret biological laboratory where a biological weapon had been developed under cover of something else? And, instead of stopping it, had the American attack accidentally triggered or released it? Or even more terrifying, had those who were covering it up been involved in creating the mutation agent in the first place, and the attack on Iran was just a stunt to trigger it? The specter of a weapon capable of turning humans into destructive machines, devoid of reason or humanity, had become a reality, and it had been created, or accidentally released, by humans. Injustice escalates. Instead of protecting citizens and confronting the new threat, the dark forces prioritize cover-ups and information control.
Reports of strange plagues in the Middle East are dismissed as enemy propaganda or common diseases. Witnesses from affected areas, if they can get out, are deemed unreliable or silenced. This creates a deep anger in Vance and Petrova as they realize they are fighting not just against a pathogen, but against a wall of power and lies. Intelligence reports begin to leak out in a controlled manner in an attempt to mislead or blame others. Some rumors suggest that Iran released its own biological weapons, while others say it was a third-party terrorist attack. But Vance and Petrova, based on the internal evidence they have been quietly collecting, know that the truth is much darker. They begin to search for an ally in the intelligence community, someone with a conscience willing to risk everything to expose the truth. Can they find that person before the cover-up succeeds in burying the truth forever, leaving humanity facing a threat no one fully understands?
Deep, Part 5. The pandemic changes when order collapses and invisible horror spreads. As cover-ups and manipulations by the dark forces were no longer enough to conceal the truth, the biochemical threat reached a new level of terror. The mutations began to spread beyond the epicenter of the Iranian attack, spreading beyond the local military and civilians to other countries via refugees, aid workers, and even secret flights. Reports of strange infections began to emerge in Turkey, Afghanistan, and even European countries with an influx of refugees from the Middle East. The fear of a biological weapon transforming humans became a reality, and it spread like an uncontrolled wildfire. Special Agent Alex Vance and Dr. Lena Petrova, caught between the government cover-up and the growing threat, realize time is running out. Intercepted reports from border checkpoints suggest that refugees with early symptoms, mild fever, disorientation, are being allowed through out of ignorance or bribery. Inside the United States, intelligence agencies begin to detect cases of the strange illness on military bases, housing soldiers returning from the Middle East, and even in major cities with large immigrant communities. The truth about the transformation cannot be hidden forever. The world was plunged into panic. As the symptoms of the transformation became more apparent, physical changes, uncontrollable aggression, loss of memory and humanity, governments around the world were forced to acknowledge the existence of a new pandemic. Countries declared states of emergency, established massive quarantine zones, and imposed martial law. Armies were mobilized not to fight an external enemy, but to control their own citizens. Major cities became blockaded fortresses, with deserted streets and the constant blare of ambulance sirens. Fear spread faster than the virus. The public, initially kept in the dark, was now faced with a threat they could not understand, could not defend against. Horrifying images of mutated relatives, of soldiers infected and attacking their comrades, began to leak online, causing a wave of panic and outrage across the globe. They were angry that the truth had been hidden. They were angry that their governments had allowed the threat to spread. And they were terrified by the realization that nowhere was safe, that anyone could be next, transformed into something less than themselves. The breakdown of social order was swift. Essential services shut down. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Supplies were running low. Citizens' rights were stripped away in the name of national security. The injustice was palpable. A political mistake, covered up by those in power, had plunged humanity into a biological catastrophe. The poor, the most vulnerable, were the first to suffer because they lacked the resources to protect themselves or escape. Vance and Petrova, now among the few people who truly understand the nature of the threat, must race against time to find a cure or a way to stop the spread. They work in harsh conditions, isolated and hunted by the very people who want to keep it secret. Their efforts are hampered by bureaucracy, internal mistrust, and widespread fear. They discover that some variants of the mutation agent are even more terrifying, capable of being transmitted through air or water, making containment nearly impossible. Meanwhile, on a political level, chaos is at its peak. World leaders are being harshly criticized, accused of causing the disaster or of covering up the truth. Civilian uprisings are erupting. Militaries are taking action on their own, sometimes against government orders, as they try to protect their people or take desperate measures to control the disease. The world is shrinking, isolated into survival zones, and humanity is facing an unprecedented future. The question is no longer who started this war, but whether there is any hope for survival.
Part 6. The terrifying dawn of a new era, the price of power and human nature. Amidst global chaos and the collapse of social order, the most haunting question remains: can humanity survive the threat it has unleashed? Or is this the beginning of a new era, one in which humanity is reshaped by a terrifying new form of weaponry? Desperate efforts to contain the mutation have reached their limits. Massive, seemingly impenetrable quarantine zones are slowly being breached. Mutants, with terrifying powers and infectiousness, are spilling out, leaving the military and defense forces on the defensive. Scientists, including Dr. Lena Petrova, race against time in fortified laboratories, trying to find a cure, a vaccine, or at least a way to better understand the biological agent. They discover that it not only transforms the body, but also affects the mind, gradually erasing individual consciousness and replacing it with primal instincts, creating the perfect, living weapons. Agent Alex Vance, caught between the ruins of a collapsing world and the specter of a hidden truth, decides to make one last desperate move. He contacts a network of conscientious intelligence officers around the world who also recognize the cover-up and the danger of the threat. Together, they devise a daring plan to reveal the full truth despite the risk of being hunted down and killed by the very forces that want to maintain the secret. The final twist, chilling and infuriating, is not about nuclear annihilation, but about how that threat is contained, or at least exploited. During Vance's investigation, he discovers that the nuclear facility attacked in Iran was not just a biological weapons facility, but a secret laboratory controlled by an international underground organization. This organization, whose members are in the highest positions of power in governments and corporations, has long been researching this mutagen, not to stop it, but to create the ultimate weapon, a weapon capable of changing society to their will. They have manipulated intelligence to get President Trump to order an attack to activate or release this agent in a controlled manner. Their plan is to let this pandemic wreak havoc, then they will emerge with a cure or control technology, establishing a new world order under their absolute control. The multi-personality nature of the villain does not lie in one individual, but in this underground organization, an anonymous yet powerful entity with many different faces: cold scientists, scheming politicians, ruthless military officers, all serving a common goal of controlling humanity through chaos and fear. They have manipulated President Trump, pushing him into the role of triggering a future he could not have foreseen. The fate of humanity, while not annihilated, has been changed forever. Large swaths of the population have been transformed into creatures no longer human. Societies have fragmented, economies have collapsed, and the old order no longer exists. The United States, along with other major powers, faces an uncertain future where the threat is not a hostile nation, but a biological threat that is altering the very nature of life. The greatest injustice is evident. A leader's decision, which was meant to protect, inadvertently becomes a tool for a darker plot, plunging all of humanity into an endless war with itself. The horror of realizing that those entrusted with power are actually manipulators of fate, and the truth is hidden by the veil of power and ambition. We have followed a journey through the most terrifying secrets of the modern world, where the lines between war and pandemic, science and madness, have blurred. The story of President Trump's attack on Iran and the biochemical threat that was unleashed does not end with an easy resolution. Instead, it leaves huge questions hanging in the air like an eternal curse. Can humanity recover from this wound? Or will we forever live in the shadow of an invisible threat born of our own decisions? From the secret underground vaults of Iran, where something has awakened, to the corridors of power, where intrigue is woven, and now to a world forever changed. All are pieces of a larger picture, a picture of human powerlessness in the face of forces beyond our control, both natural and man-made. Let this story be a wake-up call, a reminder that even in an age of science and technology, there are still secrets we cannot explain, and decisions that can forever change the course of history. Can we escape the curse of the lust for power? Or will we forever be haunted by the question, who is the real evil? The one who exploits the world's fear to turn humanity into a weapon?